Her faith was tested to the breaking point. Lysa Terkeurst shares how a season of suffering drew her closer to God. Plus,
3, 2, 1.
It's the most wonderful time of the year. See how CBN has transformed into a European Christmas village. Those stories and more on the next 700 Club Interactive. Well, welcome to the show. Last month, 26-year-old American missionary John Chau was brutally murdered after attempting to reach an ancient remote tribe on North Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean.
His death sparks a debate. Some say John broke the law, endangering the Sentinelese people by exposing them to possible infections. Others defend him as a compassionate person with a passion for reaching far-flung people groups with the gospel.
What some might not realize is how deeply John believed in the Great Commission. A decade-old clip of one of John's first sermons has emerged, evidence that for almost 10 years, God was preparing him to go into all the world and preach the gospel.
We can't just call ourselves Christians and then the next day just be like, yeah, you know, let's go to a party and get drunk and get high, whatever, get wasted, and live a lifestyle that's totally against what Christ has called us to do. We actually have to do something. In John 14:15, Jesus tells us, if you love me, you will obey what I command. And one of the commands that he gave us was in Matthew 28:19 through 20, when he says, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. If we call ourselves Christians, we need to live our lives for him. We need to obey his commands. By our deeds and actions, people will know that we're Christians. Matthew 5:16 tells us, in the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven.
You look at that video and you hear those words, and then you know what that led him to do. And you just, for me, we need to honor his death and his sacrifice. No greater love has anyone that you're willing to lay down your life. Did he know the danger? Absolutely, he knew the danger. But he said the danger is worth it if I can shed some light. In previous generations, you go back 120 years in American history, and you have Borden of Yale, who laid down his life. He left everything. He was an heir to the Borden fortune. Highly intelligent graduate of Yale University. He goes to Egypt in order to witness the gospel to the Muslims, and there dies on the mission field from a tropical disease. 100 years before that, or about 80 years before that, Henry Martin, graduate of Cambridge and absolutely brilliant man, again, an heir to a huge fortune. He leaves it all in order to go witness the gospel. Tremendous translator, again, laying down his life. Those two men prompted a generation to go into missions. And people said if they were willing to leave the comfort and the inheritance that they had in a prosperous nation, if they were willing to do that and lay down their lives, what can I do? My hope is John's death will inspire a generation here in America to really examine our comfortable Christianity and come to the conclusion that it's not, the Great Commission is not the great suggestion. It's something for all of us. And are we taking the gospel to the ends of the earth?
Well, and the story remains yet to be told, because his life is a seed planted in the ground. I think of Jim Elliot and others like him in more recent years, and their death was just the seed planted that changed tribes, that then changed nations. I mean, we're yet to see the end of this.
And changed Latin America.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
This can be a spark. It's the blood of the martyrs is always the seed of the gospel, the seed of the church.
Well, despite some effort to retrieve John's body from that remote island, the search was called off because some felt the ancient Sentinelese tribe should not be disturbed. It's unlikely those responsible for his death will ever be prosecuted for their crime, but we wait to see what God will do with this life sacrifice.
I'm not interested in prosecution. I'm interested in how do we evangelize them and show them the light. Well, Stephen Colbert, the host of The Late Show on CBS, recently revealed in a chance encounter that he had at the age of 22 that then led him away from atheism and back to his Christian faith.
Well, somewhere along the way, Colbert, who was raised in the Catholic Church, abandoned religion. Mourning the loss of faith, the college student was convinced the God he was taught to trust and love must not be real. But all of that changed one cold day in Chicago. Take a look.
I was walking down the street and someone handed me a little green, I still have it.
Oh yeah, those little ones.
Little green New Testament Proverbs and Psalms. And it must have been humid and then brought out into the cold because it was frozen. You had to like kind of snap it. It was really, really cold Chicago day. And I opened it up to a little glossary in the front, and it said basically verses to read based upon like if you, and it says anxiety.
Worry,
So I went to anxiety, and it was Matthew chapter 5. It was the sermon. And so I say to you, do not worry, for who among you by worrying could change a single hair on his head or how to keep it to the span of his life? And I was absolutely immediately lightened. And for the first time, I understood the real meaning of the phrase, it spoke to me. Like it read off the page, like the words of Christ just read off the page. It was no effort. And then I stood on that street corner in the cold and read the sermon.
That's beautiful.
My life has never been the same.
Wow.
Yeah,
Let him who has ears hear.
Amazing story. You stand on a corner in the middle of the cold with a cold scripture, and suddenly it becomes life to you. Those words suddenly can burn again into your soul. And that is the power of the Bible. Jesus is his word. He is the Word become flesh, but what an amazing miracle, because the Word becomes flesh again in us. All we have to do is read it and have our eyes opened, and suddenly you apprehend it. What a wonderful story. Well, while shooting a documentary in Germany this past summer, I came across a spectacular European Christmas market, and I started violating the 10th commandment and coveting it and thinking, why can't we do something like this back in Virginia? So this Christmas, we did.
Boy, we sure did. Last weekend, CBN opened our Christmas village, replete with holiday treats, festive traditions, and a couple tons of twinkling lights. Take a look.
3, 2, 1.
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
And this year, for the first time ever, CBN and Regent University campuses have transformed into a winter wonderland.
This German-style Christmas village provides festive attractions for the whole family.
I loved it. It was really fun. I like the trains.
We saw the snowflakes lit up on all the buildings with the lights, and both of them just started going, wow, that's so pretty.
Christmas shines brightest with our 40-foot evergreen decked out with the dazzling display of lights.
It's really been a great experience, like a little bit of a small town feeling in a big city.
Guests shop from local artisans and check out a unique display of antique cars.
And what is a Christmas village without a special guest? Santa Claus.
I like Santa. I ask for joy to the world.
Families gather together in our movie tent to watch Superbook's The First Christmas. The whole village is truly a sight to see, but for me, the highlight is right here at the live nativity. And to celebrate the true meaning of Christmas, we remember the birth of Jesus.
I do have to say I got choked up, and the words and the lights and the costumes, it's very moving. And the little children go up front and they're just mesmerized. It was wonderful.
This campus, it really is Christ-centered, and that's what Christmas is all about. It's not just Santa and gifts. Family comes together because we're just honoring, glorifying God.
Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas!
From all of us at CBN
and Regent University,
Merry Christmas.
Well, the village, the Christmas village is here. I'll spell it out for you. F-R-E-E. It is free.
Wow.
And it's open to the public, and that means you. And so if you're in our area, if you're anywhere near Virginia Beach, this coming weekend, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Thursday and Friday at 6 to 9 p.m. and then on Saturday from noon all the way to 9 p.m. So stop by, and this is the last weekend. So if you're here, you'll enjoy it. If you forgot those times, just go to cbn.com and you can get the detail and you can share it. But invite your family. Let this be a memorable time for you. All the rides are free. Some of the food trucks you got to pay for, but we do provide some free cider.
Hot chocolate and cider were free. All right. Well, coming up, when disappointments leave you shattered, how do you keep going? Best-selling author Lysa Terkeurst shows and knows firsthand how a season of suffering led her to a deeper relationship with God. All of that when we return. Lysa Terkeurst says she used to believe in a formula. Hard time plus healing time plus staying faithful to God should equal the exact good outcome that we were counting on. But after the last 2 years, she's discovered something. We cannot control our outcomes.
New York Times bestselling author and president of Proverbs 31 Ministries, Lysa Terkeurst, has recently faced some of the most difficult years of her life.
We've all experienced our fair share of things not turning out the way that we thought they would. So what do we do about it?
In her book, It's Not Supposed to Be This Way, Lysa shares how God was with her during her darkest moments, how she survived, and how you can too.
Lysa Terkeurst is joining us now, and Lysa, we welcome you back to the show.
Thank you.
You've been through so much in the last couple of years, but after 25 years of marriage, let's start with that, you discovered something that really shattered your heart, your dreams, your vision of what your life was supposed to be. Share that.
Yes, well, I found out my husband was being unfaithful, and that's definitely not something I ever thought we would face. And so not only did I feel devastated personally, but I was also just desperate to know what to do in my position at Proverbs 31 Ministry. It just all felt impossibly complicated. And at the same time, probably the deepest grief of all was I wondered if this would be the unraveling of the Christian legacy that we'd built into our 5 children. So it was very hard. 2016 was that year of extreme highs and extreme lows. Not only was I walking through this with my husband, but 3 of our 5 kids got married that year.
Oh, my word.
So it was...
One marriage in a year is stressful.
Exactly. Yeah. But one thing that God had instilled in my heart in January of 2016, before I found out what was happening with my husband in February, I'd had an intense time of prayer and fasting. And I'm not a fasting girl, trust me. I don't want you messing with my food, right? But the Lord had really instilled in me some intense time with Him. And what came out of that was, Lysa, trust my timing and love your husband. And so 3 weeks later, I found out what was happening with Art, and chaos ensued because of the emotional devastation was so deep. But I was so grateful I didn't have to try to find God's voice in the midst of that. I just went back to the last time I clearly heard God speak, and I just knew that the Lord was going to direct me, but the tears were immense and the grief was deep.
Yeah. How did you begin the move forward from there? Because it wasn't just that. But before we answer that, talk a little bit about what happened to you health-wise during that year.
Right. So in June of that year, I kept telling all my friends that I felt like my insides were twisted up because the grief was so immense because of the emotional devastation. But literally that was happening to me. I was rushed to the hospital. The doctor started running tests. I was in so much pain, they admitted me to the hospital. And the doctors kept running tests and kept saying they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. So that was on a Monday. And so I laid there in pain Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday morning, a surgeon came in my room. He said, "We ran one last test and we know what's happening. Your colon is ripped away from the abdominal wall, twisted around itself, cut the blood flow off. And had God answered your prayer to take away the pain, you would have gone home, your colon would have ruptured, and you would have died." Wow. And it was in that moment I recognized God loves us too much to answer our prayer at any other time than the right time, and in any other way than the right way. They rushed me into surgery. They removed most of my colon. They saved my life. But I had a different view of God, walking through not just physical pain, but emotional pain. I knew we serve a good God who allows hurt, but we also serve a good God who allows hurt, but who will use that hurt for good, even if we can't see what that good is.
And sometimes I mean, your story is almost like Job's. Just when you think this can't possibly get worse,
yes,
then you get a breast cancer diagnosis.
Yes.
I mean, at that point, Lysa, did you not just wonder what in the world is going on in my life and my world?
Of course I did.
How did you handle that?
Well, you know, in those first initial moments of shock, my feelings wanted to run ahead of my faith. And I had those questions everyone has when you go through difficult times. Why me? Why this? Why now?
Where are you?
And where are you, God? But I think as I was driving home from that diagnosis, I had an honest conversation with God. I said, God, you know, people already know what I'm walking through with my marriage and with my other health issues, so they're going to be really upset. And you need to give me some answers because I don't even know what to say to people. And I'm really upset. And I want to know, like, I want to know, why is all of this happening and what are you doing with this? But you know, Terry, God doesn't want to be explained away. He just wants to be invited in. And I still don't know why all of this happened. I may never have those answers. None of us may ever have the answers that we're looking for, but what I do know is God has not cursed me with this. He has entrusted me with this season of devastation. And I am determined to walk toward a God who can use it for good. And so I don't know the answers, but I know my God is trustworthy.
You know, people everywhere go through difficulties, some more than others, but you were in a position with your Proverbs 31 ministry where people were already watching you. Now, God really entrusted this season of devastation, if you will, of being shattered to you as you walk this out for other people to see. I mean, you're a communicator, you're a teacher, you have the Word of God alive in you. I believe that God allowed this so that you could light a candle in the midst of darkness for other people.
I pray that that is true. But you know, one thing, as I was writing one day in my journal, and I often will hear from the Lord, like I'll be writing something and all of a sudden what I've written is really God's message to me. And people have often said, Lysa, I think you've walked through this because you're in ministry. And one day in my journal, what came out is, no, Lysa, God placed you in ministry all those years ago because he knew you'd walk through this. And so what a good thing that God has done for me personally, all these years to have been surrounded by faith-filled people, good teaching, and to have personally let all of these truths be in me so that they could come out of me. So I think it's both. For me and for them.
When the little boy sacrificed his lunch, God broke it and fed the multitudes. Yeah, that's what he's doing with your stories. Well, the book is called It's Not Supposed to Be This Way. If you're going through a difficult time, a struggle, figure out how to get back to God. This book will give you the direction for all of that. It's really a wonderful read. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Available where books are sold, by the way. Gordon?
Still ahead, after a journey of hundreds and hundreds of miles and a long plane ride to unfamiliar areas, immigrant children are arriving in the U.S. and winding up on this couple's doorsteps.
I think until you are face to face with it and until you are tucking that crying kid in at night and hearing their stories, like, you don't understand the magnitude of what they're going through.
See how foster families like these are reframing the national debate about our borders. That's up next. Well, right now, our government is caring for 13,000 immigrant children in federal shelters, but some have been placed in family foster care. Heather Sells introduces us to two couples who are giving these kids love and comfort. They've asked that their identity be protected for the children's sake.
For the last 2 years, foster parents Silas and Corinne have welcomed immigrant children into their Michigan home. These children often arrive alone at the border, and the government oversees their care while it locates their families.
We pick them up from the airport at like midnight. So they're coming to this brand new country, this new state, this new home, people that don't speak their language.
Silas and Corinne received their training from Grand Rapids-based Bethany Christian Services. It's become a leading provider of family-based care for immigrant children. For almost 40 years, Bethany has helped kids showing up alone at the border. Then this spring came a new and surprising development. The children began telling their foster parents how they came with their parents and then were taken from them by the government. It was part of the controversial and short-lived zero-tolerance policy.
They didn't know that they weren't going to see their parents again in many cases. So these children were separated, they were taken, put in on a bus or an airplane, and they had no idea where they were going or what was happening.
Silas and Corinne welcomed 4 children, ages 3 to 9.
We saw a lot of trauma, a lot of nightmares, stomach aches, headaches.
Adam and Rachel's foster child told her counselor how she saw Honduran police shoot her grandmother. After the girl and her father fled to the U.S., she watched border agents take him away.
As a 4-year-old, she just had such a heavy soul from that and from just constantly reliving being torn away from her dad. And so I think what we saw was those 2 traumatic experiences just compounded on a 4-year-old's shoulders. And there was times where, yeah, it would crush her.
I was very frustrated watching it play out on the news and seeing both sides of this story, because I think there were a lot of people who also didn't get it. And I think until you are face to face with it, and until you are tucking that crying kid in at night and rubbing their back and laying with them and hearing their stories, like, you don't understand the magnitude of what they're going through.
Under the policy, the government took 2,400 children from their parents. Today, almost all are back with family, either in the U.S. or their home country. Still, foster parents are in high demand because of children who come alone to the U.S. Right now, a staggering 13,000 are in federal custody. Bethany can only care for 100, so the government puts many of the kids in emergency facilities. This is a new tent city in Texas where 1,500 youth live while they wait to be reunited with family.
Kids should never have to stay in a tent city. Kids should never be apart from their parents. And it just shows you how desperate things are, that kids are hearing about this and their parents are still sending them.
We know in this country that children are best cared for in a family setting. That's what we do in our own domestic foster care setting. We don't place thousands of children who are in foster care in one large tent city, where we promote foster homes and foster care placement because we know that's what's best for children. These children are no different.
Experts blame government red tape for the high number of immigrant kids still in government custody. One reason, a new rule took effect this year requiring all members of a household taking in children to be fingerprinted. That has increased the wait time. Now the Trump administration has changed that rule, and there's hope that the number of kids in shelters will drop. All this at a time that foster parents are recovering from a year they never expected.
Obviously, kids being separated from their parents is not God's vision of the world. And so how do we step into the kingdom work that he has for us to solve that?
Corinne and Silas marvel at the resiliency displayed by their children and hope they can recover and receive what they need to someday achieve their dreams.
One of the little boys we just had, his dream was to be a firefighter or a police officer. So they have these big dreams, and we just hope that they get the opportunity to realize those.
Going forward, Bethany hopes to expand its foster program for the children who continue to pour across the border. It also wants their home countries and the U.S. to address the issues that caused their families to flee in the first place. Reporting in Grand Rapids, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Well, that's a hopeful report from what I consider an absolute national disgrace, where a governmental policy was enforced at the border that if families are coming over illegally, that we're going to separate the children from the parents. That is horrific, and it stopped, but now we're dealing with the after effects. And one of the after effects is, how do you reunite them? And we're finding that's impossible. These people don't have addresses, they don't have homes. So how do you find the parents now? And how do the parents now find their children? How do you reunite them? But again, the church is in there, which I applaud. Bethany Church, I applaud what they're doing. They're trying to bring hope to these kids and get them out of government shelters and into homes, which is where they belong. Terry, do you see any solution here? Do you see any?
Well, I see that, Bethany Christian Services is a wonderful organization. We've used them in adoptions in our own family, but, we need more homes to open up. I mean, we have homes opening up in the foster care system. I'm glad to see that they're vetting the people who open their homes in this whole thing, but I don't know the answer to this either. It's just that children shouldn't pay the price for decisions that grown-ups make. I mean, and so while
they so often do.
They're voiceless, so that makes them very vulnerable. I mean, I love seeing couples who are willing to open their homes to multiple children and let them come in and discover what family looks like here.
All right, and if you're one of them, I encourage you to get in touch with Orphans Promise, and they'll give you more information.
Bethany Social Services too, that's great.
Well, here's a word from Deuteronomy, and this is God. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. God bless you.